Hello, everybody. I'm John Fawcett in for Lou Dobbs on today's episode of The Great America Show. Well, there's fighting inside the Democratic Party about who the nominee will be. Joe Biden says it will be him. He's tired of the elites trying to push him out of the race. Our guest today, Lee Smith, says it doesn't matter if it's Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Michelle Obama. Doesn't matter who it is. We need to figure this out, though. Lee, great to have you with us.
Thank you, John. And always nice to be with you and nice to be speaking to you in particular today.
So your new piece out on your locals, and it's, what is it, leesmith.locals.com. The yes. Madame Tussauds presidency. It doesn't matter to Dem voters. Biden isn't there, all there. So as long as Barack Obama is.
Yeah.
What do you have to say?
I think that I think Republicans, I think Republican influencers on social media, I think we've all been wasting a lot of time talking about who's going to be the Democratic candidate. And look, the issue is fundamentally this. Joe Biden showed up for his debate with Donald Trump, and he performed the way that Republicans have been saying he would perform, because Joe Biden isn't all there, and Joe Biden wasn't all there in 2020. And Republicans all know this. And so what's the issue? The media, the Democratic Party aligned media, has been covering for Joe Biden for 4 years. There was no way for them to cover for his debate performance. They're embarrassed. What are they embarrassed about? Or before whom are they embarrassed? They don't care about their own base, right? Because their own base has said, it's quite explicit. We don't care. We'd prefer to vote. We will vote for a comatose Joe Biden over Orange Man Hitler any day. It doesn't matter. What are they doing? They're embarrassed because the right was shown to be right. There was no way for the people on CNN or other Democratic Party media operatives to conceal what was going on. What we're seeing now is just that, right? Whether there is a debate, remember, the same media are the same people who reported everything from Russiagate to January 6th, right? What did they say about Russiagate? They said, oh, there's a secret clandestine operation, contacts between Trump officials and Russian officials, and Putin owns Trump, and this and that. What they're reporting now about what's happening in the Democratic Party, we have no idea what's really going on inside the Democratic Party. Right. So that's a very important thing to remember. We do not know how accurate the media is representing any debates that may or may not be happening inside the Democratic Party. But the most crucial fact is this: they ran the same person in 2020 and they won. Right. So it should be astonishing to people on the right, especially people on the right who are convinced, and I'm partial to this point of view, that there was massive ballot fraud in 2020. So the same people who believe that Biden is now the president of the United States because of massive ballot fraud in 2020, and there appears to be more evidence surfacing every day that that was the case, are now concerned, are now believing Democratic Party debate about who they should run. Do you see what I'm saying? This makes no sense. If we believe that Joe Biden won because of ballot fraud in 2020, then that's the issue this year too, right? It's not, the Democrats are not saying, oh, wow, it looks like Biden is losing badly to Trump because of his policies. Who's a more plausible candidate that we can get in there? That's not the issue. The key issue is the same as it was 4 years ago.
And I take your point to that. We were talking before the show. This, and we may have disagreed on this a little bit, but this seems to be the first time we're seeing, all that aside, obviously, there were a lot of issues with the 2020 election, and they'll probably try to do it again in the 2024 election. But this is the first time I think we're seeing in a long time, even reports of there being infighting inside the Democratic Party. This is from Jake Sherman at Punchbowl News from the meeting on Tuesday on Capitol Hill. Regarding Joe Biden. From Mark Takano, Democrat at 39, California, says he recently saw a straw poll that Biden is losing in his district. Biden won his district 62% of the vote last time. So you have guys like this who are in districts that Biden carried heavily, who I think are just losing their mind because they think they're going to lose their seat because of whether it be Joe Biden's policies or his debate performance. How do you see this playing out inside the Democratic Party?
Well, look, I mean, the polls are a funny thing, right? I mean, the polls make no sense because if we're talking about 2020, what happened in 2020? Again, this is a mainstream MAGA and actually now Republican Party belief that there was massive ballot fraud, which means what? Which means when they're asking questions in polls about things like registered voters and likely voters, what does likely voter mean when there's massive ballot fraud? It means nothing, right? This is what I'm trying to argue with people. All of the different things that we've talked about in the past that make elections real, that are real things, none of these make sense at this point, right? So what is this debate about between the Democrats? Maybe it exists, maybe it doesn't. The leader of the Democratic Party is who? He's the former president who's still living in Washington, D.C., the first time that this has happened in over a century, and the last American president who stayed in Washington, D.C. after his term ended is Woodrow Wilson after he suffered a debilitating stroke and couldn't move. Barack Obama is still there. He's the leader of the party. Now, if someone on the right who is reading Democratic Party debates can tell me what's in the mind of Barack Obama, then I'll listen to that. Until we get to that point, again, I strongly encourage people to avoid to ignore whatever debates are happening in the Democratic Party and to focus on crucial issues. And the crucial issue is the same as it was in 2020. Look, people complain about open borders. We've been complaining about open borders. That's one of the core issues. Millions and millions of people have crossed our border. Do these represent ballots? I would say that's a pretty important question for Republican officials going forward, for Trump campaign officials going forward. The debates going on in the Democratic Party and what's actually in Barack Obama's head, no, forget it. Again, polls are important to a limited extent, but insofar as they're really going to predict what is going to happen in November after we saw what happened in 2020, again, that's off the table, right? I mean, this is one of the bizarre things that happened after 2020. All of these things that make elections look real, whether they're journalists, whether they're pollsters, whether they're consultants, right, whatever. If we were living in a real time, right? If we were living in a normal time in American politics, there is no doubt that Democratic Party consultants and strategists would say, it just occurred to me the Republicans may have a point. Joe Biden doesn't look great. As a matter of fact, he keeps walking into walls. He can't finish a sentence without it devolving into gibberish. We might, for goodness sakes, we might actually need to think about another candidate, right?
Here's what we're doing, Lee. Let's take a quick break here. I want to get your sense on the other side of this break of what Lee thinks is going on inside of Barack Obama's head, what Barack wants right now. I also want to take up the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act, the SAVE Act. And you'd mentioned maybe a stolen election. The Democrats, and Joe Biden in particular, is very against this bill. We're going to talk about it when we return. We're talking with Lee Smith. We're coming right back. Stay with us.
Wellness Company and their doctors are medical professionals you can trust. And their new medical emergency kits are the gold standard when it comes to keeping you safe and healthy. This medical emergency kit contains an assortment of life-saving medications, including ivermectin, Z-Pak. Rest assured, knowing that you have emergency antibiotics, antivirals, and antiparasitics on hand to help you and your family stay safe from whatever life throws at you next.
We're back. We're talking with brilliant investigative journalist Lee Smith. Lee, right before we went to break, we were talking about the ringleader, perhaps, Barack Obama, and what he's thinking right now as he runs his puppet, Joe Biden. What do you think is going on inside of Barack's head right now? What does he want? What does he want to see? Does he care if Joe Biden's at the top of the ticket? What does he want?
Well, as I said, none of us really know what's in Barack Obama's head, but we can make some pretty good guesses, right? Again, he ran Joe Biden in 2020, and Joe Biden may have gotten a little bit worse, but he was pretty bad in 2020. As Republicans were pointing out in 2020, they kept the guy in a basement, right? That's how bad it was. They wouldn't let him out in public on his own. It's the same thing, and that's what we've all been watching here since the Biden campaign of 2020. Was Barack Obama happy then? Yes, he certainly was. Is Barack Obama happy now? Well, I would imagine he is, because Joe Biden has managed to check off a number of very important items on progressives' wish list, including open borders, including budgeting trillions of dollars for the climate change agenda. Right. So what has Joe Biden done that progressives don't like? I mean, there's only one thing I can think of, and that's the limited support he's lent Israel, trying to balance different constituencies in the Democratic Party. I think that's the only thing. Everything else, Joe Biden, from a progressive viewpoint, I mean, Joe Biden is heroic. It's a historic presidency. He's opened the borders. He's done what progressives have wanted to do for ages. The amount of money, again, budgeted for climate change. Wow, it's heroic. I think it's important that we see these different things through the eyes of progressives, because that's what's going on, right? That's who Barack Obama is. The one problem, again, is this: trying to, from the progressive viewpoint, it's they're unhappy that Biden has not entirely exposed Israel to the depredations of the Palestinian terror enclave headed by Hamas. That's the one issue. Everything else is great. So what's the problem right now with Joe Biden? I don't know. You tell me. It's the same guy as he was in 2020. And in fact, insofar as what we've seen here, insofar as what we've experienced since 2016, right, after Donald Trump was elected president, and we saw the riots in Washington, D.C. because Donald Trump won the White House by surprise. We've seen a campaign of desecration, a campaign of demoralization, whether that was the George Floyd riots, whether this is the 1619 Project, whether this is trying to replace the national anthem and July 4th, right? These are meant to destroy American history. That's what I mean by desecration and demoralization. Insofar as we all recognize that this has been going on since 2016, we're moving on a decade of the campaign of demoralization and desecration. What could be better than having a man like Joe Biden out in front, right? People make the analogy to the Soviet Union, and people talk about the aging and mentally deranged Soviet leaders. Because everyone knew that they were just a front for power, and real decisions were being made by the Politburo. That's who was in charge, not the leader they put out front, not whether it was a decaying and drop off, right, or Brezhnev. And I believe it's the same thing here as well. If insofar as this is a part of the campaign of demoralization and desecration, and to tell people you have no choice, you have no control over your lives anymore. We're going to open the borders and let anyone in. Doesn't matter if they're terrorists or felons, what they do to your families, what they do to your communities. It's just what we're doing. We're just going to put 150,000 Afghani refugees in your town, in your state. And if you don't like it, tough. It's the same thing here. You would see the Biden candidacy is the same thing. We're going to run a clearly cognitive challenged candidate. And guess what? You have no choice. That's who you got, because the decisions are made far beyond your ken, and you have no control over your lives, over the fate of your families and communities, never mind the fate of your country, because it's not your country. It's a territory that's governed by Barack Obama and his friends in the Barack Obama faction of the Democratic Party.
Well, you mentioned open borders, right? And obviously that's a big issue now going on. There was a report out this week from NICE, and they'd estimated there's 17 million illegals in this country right now, which doesn't account for gotaways, so it's presumably over 20 million. And the report said that 99% of them are living freely throughout this country, whether they're in New York, whether they're in Texas, whether they're in Florida. And, you know, we have now coming to the House floor, you've got the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act, the SAVE Act from Chip Roy, which the Biden administration put out this week, a press statement saying this bill would do nothing. And the bill is meant to make it harder for illegals to vote in these elections. But then you got the 99% of them living freely, so it makes you question that. Anyway, the Biden administration put out a statement saying this bill would do nothing to safeguard our elections, but it would make it harder for all eligible Americans to register to vote and increase the risk that eligible voters are purged from voter rolls. You need a license to get on an airplane. You need a license to pick up a prescription. You need a license to apply for a job. You need a license to adopt a pet from PetSmart. Why is Joe Biden so against this?
I mean, it's obvious, right? It's they say, oh, it's racist. This is what was Biden's line? Jim Crow on steroids, or whatever his line was. Something like Jim Eagle, right? Wasn't that his brilliant line? Very clever guy, that Joe Biden. That's what you get when you have a mummified president. Great one-liners like that. Look, I mean, it's quite obvious. The point of it is to rationalize cheating. Right. That's it. Right. I mean, that's the only purpose. Look, I think the real question is what's going to happen? We are looking at the polls. And as I said before, we should take under consideration what things like polling and what things like journalism mean now. Right. Especially after 2020. We should take that into serious consideration. But Americans, Donald Trump supporters, Republicans, independents who are hugely and righteously dissatisfied with the way that the Joe Biden administration has run this country the last 4 years, are optimistic, right? We see ahead of us a light ahead of us in the tunnel. And what is that light? The light is a Donald Trump presidency. Right. Even for people who don't like Donald Trump, they at least want a return to normalcy. Right. They don't want to they don't want to feel overburdened every time they go to the grocery store or the gas station. What's going to happen if, despite all the polls, what the polls are showing, what's going to happen if we find out that, in fact, the election was swung by illegal alien votes? What will that America look like in November, December, January, and for the foreseeable
I'll tell you what it looks like. It looks like we'll see more indictments of President Trump for calling out a stolen election. We'll see more indictments of people like Jeffrey Clark and Peter Navarro and Steve Bannon of the world. That's what it'll look like. Yeah,
I mean, I think it's going to look worse, frankly.
Right. Let's take a quick break here, Lee. I want to take this up on the other side of the break. The Democrats, it's been a week since the Trump immunity ruling from the Supreme Court, and the Democrats are still going crazy. Chuck Schumer says they're going to get rid of the immunity for January 6th. I want to take that up on the other side of this break. We're talking with brilliant journalist Lee Smith. Coming right back.
Wellness Company and their doctors are medical professionals you can trust. And their new medical emergency kits are the gold standard when it comes to keeping you safe and healthy. This medical emergency kit contains an assortment of life-saving medications, including ivermectin, Z-Pak. Rest assured, knowing that you have emergency antibiotics, antivirals, and antiparasitics on hand to help you and your family stay safe from whatever life throws at you next.
We're back. We're talking with investigative journalist Lee Smith. And Lee, right before we went to break, we were talking about the immunity from the Supreme Court for President Trump. It's been a week, but the Democrats, are just in disarray. They can't seem to settle with the fact that the Supreme Court granted the rule of law and sided with the rule of law. How do you think this proceeds going forward? Chuck Schumer saying, he wants to get rid of Trump's January 6th immunity. Well, how do you think we move forward with this?
Well, of course, because all of the cases against Donald Trump and Trump aides like Jeffrey Clark are make believe, right? They're all fiction. It's all third world security regime stuff. That's what happens. You just punish your political opponents. And so while we're right to celebrate that the Constitution, the Constitution won. Let's keep in mind what the Constitution is fighting, right? The Constitution is not advocating between people with different, with slightly different views about how we allocate our tax money, right? Well, I don't know. Should we spend more on guns or more on butter? How are we going to do this? What about foreign aid? What about welfare? No, this is not the issue, right? The Constitution is not designed to adjudicate between the citizens of a constitutional republic and the leaders of a third world security regime, right? So again, this is a temporary blow for regime figures like Charles Schumer, like Joe Biden's Department of Justice. But of course, I mean, there is no doubt that they'll be back with something else, and they'll look to target more people. That's what's going on here.
So what you're saying is you think there's more people who have yet to be targeted by the Biden administration that are yet to come? Is that what you're saying?
They're not going to stop. I mean, the idea that the Supreme Court also was supposed to stop Joe Biden from relieving student loan debt. Did it? He bragged that it did not. So no, of course not. No, again, the Constitution was not designed for this, right? When we talk about the Constitution was meant for a moral people, what that means is it's like there are things that Americans wouldn't dream of doing before, that Americans, you wouldn't do because it's un-American, right? I mean, how do you play, you play baseball, to brush someone off the plate, you would throw under their chin, or you'd even throw at their head to get them to dive in the dirt. What you wouldn't do is, if you were the catcher, you wouldn't cut out his tendons behind him, right? That you wouldn't do that. It's not American. It's not part of the rules of the game. But that's who we're playing with here. We're playing with people who do not play by the rules of the game. It's not just un-American. It's criminal. It's totalitarian. So the idea that the Constitution is going to defend us from this, no, again, it was a big day for the Constitution. It's a terrific victory, but let's understand what the game looks like as a whole and who we're playing against. So the idea that Chuck Schumer is going that's not going to work. We have something else. We have something else cooking right now, and you'll see what it is at a time of our choosing. Yeah, of course, that's who they are.
So real quick before we wrap up here, do you think in the next 6 months, in the next year, whether Trump wins or loses, it looks like he's well on his way to victory? Do you think these wrongs are righted? The Steve Bannons of the world, the Peter Navarros of the world, the Jeff Clarks. Do you think at the end of the day it's all made right? President Trump will be vindicated on all cases, both state and federal.
Well, I'm of the opinion that we should probably stop thinking about the world in terms of the deep state. And insofar as we're fighting that our enemies are the deep state, because that's a way to describe losing, right? Fighting a bureaucracy of how many thousands of people in Washington, D.C. and around the country. So we're going to fight every U.S. attorney in all 50 states, or most of them anyway. No, look, I'm cheered and gladdened when I hear Donald Trump allies talk about, no, we're going to fix the bureaucracy and do this and that. That's great. But the real point is to go after the leadership. That's what they've been doing. They've been going after Donald Trump and Donald Trump aides. That's what real political fights look like. You go after the leadership. So to talk about in terms of the deep state, I mean, that's silly. So John, you're asking if I'm optimistic about that happening. I'm saying what the focus needs to be. It has to move away from the deep state. The problem with America right now is not Peter Strzok and Lisa Page's text messages, right? It's a much bigger problem. The issue is who is paying for what, to whom, on behalf of what causes, right? Once we start asking questions like that, and we know all the names, we say them all the time. Right. We confuse the issue by talking about the deep state. It's not the deep state, right? These are bureaucrats. So who are the leaders? Who are the leaders? On behalf of what causes are they doing what things, and by whom are they paid? These are the things that we need to focus on.
Well, one last thing before we wrap up here. Obviously in President Trump's first term, he didn't make the best decisions personnel wise. And it could be the reason why we're in this mess today with political prisoners, hundreds of political prisoners, former administration officials, being persecuted and prosecuted. Do you think Trump rights that ship? They often say retribution, like he's not entitled to it after going through what he's went through since 2015. Do you think he rights this ship in a new administration and takes care of what he didn't in the first administration?
I'm very hopeful that's the case. I believe that that's what he wants to do. I believe that people who are close to the president believe he will do it. Look, I mean, there are other factors we have to consider here. It's like, do people who respect the president and his policies and would like to work for them, what do their families say if you're a 28-year-old? If you're a 28-year-old and you have 2 children, and what does your wife say when you're offered a job in the Trump administration? Does she say, honey, that's so terrific, I'm so excited, it's time for you to serve your country, and when the president asks, of course you have to go serve? Or does your family say, does your father go, hey, look, I work for Nixon, and it's good, you should work for the government, but they want to destroy Trump, and they're going to destroy everyone around Trump. Right. So even though this is a great honor, I think you should think hard about it. So, again, I believe that the president does want to set things back in order. But what happens? What are the kinds of threats that people have to go through? Because, John, you were just talking about what Chuck Schumer, how he's eyeing going after, how he's eyeing going after immunity on January 6th. What else do they have cooked up in store for people, political allies of Donald Trump? That's not going to stop.
Right. And for everybody watching, Lee's got 2 great books out. They're must reads if you want to see a detailed explanation of everything that went through this deep state and everything that happened to President Trump. One of them, The Plot Against the President, and the other, The Permanent Coup. 2 great reads by Lee Smith. I've read them both. And I mean, it tells you everything you need to know about everything. Lee, where can people read your stuff and watch your podcast? LeeSmith.locals.com. Also, I'm a contributor over at Tablet Magazine, where I write a lot about the Middle East. But there's a lot going on right now, so there's a lot to write about, and I hope to be able to fill in people as much as I can about what's coming. And I urge people to pay attention to what's happening over the next couple months. And while we should always be optimistic no matter what, and this election should not affect who we are as Americans and what we stand for and what we fight for. But again, I counsel people strongly to stay on their toes and be aware, because I believe that these next few months and even after the election, we're going to go through a very hard time as Americans. I think we're all praying for the right outcome, and that outcome is President Trump. It's LeeSmith.locals.com. Lee Smith, you're amazing. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, John, for inviting me on today.
Thanks to Lee Smith, and thank you for joining us here today on The Great America Show. Be sure to join us tomorrow for The Great America Show. Our guest is House Oversight Chairman James Comer. James Comer wants answers from the White House physician. Why was there a Parkinson's disease doctor at the White House 10 times in the last 10 months or so? He wants answers, and he joins us tomorrow to discuss. Be sure to join us for that tomorrow right here on The Great America Show. And be sure to join Lou each and every weeknight on Frank Speech, Roku, Rumble, and X at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 Central for Lou Dobbs Tonight. Thanks, everybody. God bless you, and may God bless America.